Thank you. I'd like to welcome you to the first of two community forums for the selection of the interim president of the Santa Fe Community College. I'm Lynn Klein, the host of Klein's Corner on KSFR FM radio, located here on the SFCC campus, and I'll be your moderator today and tomorrow. The SFCC Governing Board launched a search for an interim president after President Randy W. Grissom announced his retirement in August. His retirement is effective October 31st. Thank you, President Grissom, for your service to SFCC as well as the community of Santa Fe. These forums give the college campus and community members the opportunity to meet the finalists and to provide feedback to the college's governing board. Let me just take a moment to share with you the format of today's forum. First, Dr. South will present opening remarks to you. He will then join me for a tabletop question and answer session with questions submitted by the Staff and Faculty Senate and the Student Government Association. We will then open the floor to questions from you, the audience, and please feel free to raise your hand, and Emily and Laura will bring a microphone to you. Or at any time, you can fill out a card at the side of the room and drop it in the basket on that table over there. We will try to include as many of your questions as time allows. Following the Q&A, Dr. South will make a closing remark. Both today and tomorrow's forums are limited to an hour and a half. One last note, your feedback is valuable to the college, and we appreciate your contributions to this process. Please note the screens around the room. They contain a web address where you can provide your feedback at www.sfcc.edu/interim. Now, please join me in formally welcoming Dr. Gregory Maxwell South.
Thank you for that introduction. I was just reminded on my phone to turn the ringer off. The one time you forget to do it when you know it rings. Make sure I shut that off. Nope. Thank you for your patience. My apologies. I think I have it off now. Since I say that, it'll go off again. I might have to move this out. Well, thank you for your patience. Thank you for coming. I am honored that this many people actually came to listen to me. And thank you for taking time out of your busy days. And I think it speaks well, it reflects upon you, your interest in this institution, that you're showing up to hear what the interim presidents have to say, potential interim presidents have to say. And so I thank you for that. I'm honored by the fact that you came to listen to me. So I know we have some questions. This is the hardest part for me. I'm not good at talking about myself. They asked me to speak for a few minutes about myself, so I have, as far as background and preparation, a doctorate degree in education and performance and leadership psychology. Can you hear me back there? I'm seeing. Does this one work better? Just on? Thank you. Is that better? Yes. Oh, good. I can move and not have to stand there like a statue. Well, so my doctorate degree, I talked about that. I also was accepted in and graduated from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Management and Leadership in Education, which is preparation for this. Their future, and then also the AACC's Rockefeller-funded, the American Association of Community Colleges, Rockefeller-funded Futures Leadership Institute Advanced Program, and also another program called Administrator 101. They're all kind of similar things, but I try to attend things as often as I can to grow and learn and stay current. And I've been to a lot of things. But I think academic preparation and background, those are the highlights. Professionally, I've been a board-appointed acting superintendent president in a circumstance rather like this where they need an interim. And then I've also 7 years experience as a vice president, at least that many years experience as a dean, and more years experience than that as an instructor and faculty member, so I haven't forgotten my roots. And so I think that's my professional and academic background and preparation. I've done a lot of things over the years in this field, and I have great passion for this level. I have my research, my publications, my research interest as a researcher and academic is in performance and leadership development, performance psychology. I'm a performance psychologist, and I'm fascinated with good leadership and leadership development. And I think a key differentiator for me, rather than just being a manager and an executor, is my leadership training and background and those programs I've been through, and the ability to work with people and build consensus and build a future together. And so I'm fascinated by those things, and I think in this environment I welcome the prospect. When this, I technically am retired, but I was told by a friend of mine that's a college president that, Greg, you're failing at your retirement again by applying for this job. But when I saw this, my phone number, the thing that was making noise a few minutes ago, is still a 575 number. My time in New Mexico, and I've always thought I'd come back and maybe buy some property in the corridor between here and Albuquerque to permanently retire. But when this position opened up, I thought, I can punch out from where I'm at. I have enough. And you have been doing so many innovative things here at this institution for so long. And Randy, the president's done a good job with that stuff. I think I've done a lot of those things myself, but I think this is a place that I can contribute to, but also learn from. And maybe do another interim or two after this somewhere. But right now, that's part of my motivation for applying, because I thought I could learn from all of you. I've met several of you today as I've walked around, and got a lot of look at algae today from over there. And I had a great campus tour. Didn't get to see it all, because for a comprehensive community college of this size, y'all have a lot going on, and you need to take stock in where you're at and what you've done, because you're poised. I know there's some difficult economic challenges at the state level, but you're poised for, there's leadership in up times and leadership in down times, and it's cyclical. And you're poised for future growth and success right now. And to me, it was an interesting, fascinating challenge to kind of come in and support that and continue it and maybe take it further and set it for all of y'all, which I learned when I used to live down here, but future growth in your professions and helping students. So I think maybe I'll leave it at that. I have, like I said, the hardest thing for me is talking about myself. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for those opening remarks. So now we'll turn to the tabletop question and answer session. So we'll just dive right in here.
Can you hear me back there in the back? Okay, I don't see any ears. So.
Okay, so we'll just start up from the top.
Yes, ma'am. What
do you see as the role of student government on a community college campus?
I think that's a good question. I think that's vital. I had a chance to meet and visit with the president of the student earlier, and we were talking about her goals in the role that she's in, and also her future goals. And I think it's critical. One of the things I did at my last school is I petitioned the board for and added a student trustee, because I think it's vital to have the students' input. I have a sign in my office. It's behind my door when people come, behind my head, when people come in and they come in with ideas, and if they're not aligning right, I'll say, well, how does it relate to that? And it says, it's about the students. And so I think the students' input is important, and we have that position. It's a non-voting trustee member. But then I also spend time each month prior to the board meetings and meeting weekly with the student trustee, usually to talk about current events and issues and what are the students seeing that I'm missing. The one great thing I found about getting older is it feels the same on the inside, but it's starting to look different on the outside, and the kids see things differently than I do, and not always, but it's invaluable to have their input because they're why we're here. So I think I'd leave it at that.
Right. And how would you describe your management style or approach to leading a community college?
If I get too close to this thing, tell me. He moved it up and I feel like I'm going to eat it. But, well, that's an interesting question. I was talking about my research interests, my publications and peer-reviewed journals and leadership development. In fact, I was over at the UN's four-year Congress presenting some of that research a couple years ago in Bern in Switzerland. And to me, that question's more complex. I offer that as a background and a framework. I have to add a little more to that. I think good leaders, by virtue, by necessity, of working in this environment. See, I approach these circumstances as collaborative. And you know, a lot of people like to use the word servant leadership. I don't use that because I've had formal training in that and research in that arena. You know, servant leadership assumes two things. It assumes that you have willing and you have able followers. Here we have highly educated in terms of the faculty, master's degrees, PhDs, and highly well-trained staff in their areas, and they're not just going to do something because you barked an order. The whole thing is set up so that you can work collaboratively and participatory through participatory governance. That's why you have a Senate. That's why you have other things. And I learned a long time ago that, yeah, I'm a content expert in my area, but that's a very narrow area of leadership. And so I embrace the opportunity to have the feedback and the advice from those groups and the leadership groups that are set up, the participatory governance groups that are set up on campus, and work together with them and partner for future success. I think at the leadership, there are certainly characteristics that oftentimes in current society sometimes now are being lost, but they all come under the heading of character. Things like integrity, honesty, transparency. I tend to be very transparent. You know, there are certainly things in confidential environments that you can't disclose or discuss, but everything that I can. I'd like you folks to know what I know, so you understand where I'm coming from and why I'm looking at making decisions a certain way, but I also want your input, because we'll end up with a better product if we have buy-in, if we have participation in it, and people have ownership in it. I learned a long time ago in these environments that leading by fiat does not work. Force feeding does not work. And so I think leadership, you have those characteristics, but then in the overall larger framework of leadership, maybe you have servant leadership, maybe you have transformational, which you have highly able, capable people, but not willing, and that's you use a different style of leadership. Or if you have other ones where they just want to know what their job is, and you know, contingent reward, transactional leadership, and this is what I get paid, what's the job description do, and what's expected of me. So you use a different style of leadership for them, but the core tenets of character and honor do not change. And I fear we've lost that in society as people start to do things for their own advantage. So I try to behave. I was trained on character and honor by my family and by my professional mentors. So leadership styles vary a little bit depending upon the level you're working with, but components of leadership like character, honor, integrity, transparency, working collaboratively, those things don't change. Does that make sense? It's kind of a long answer, and I hope I didn't ramble too much, but could you all follow it? Does it sound crazy or to make sense? Okay, because I could sound crazy, but okay.
So this next question segues from what you were just discussing. What would you list as your 5 core values, and how do they shape how you would lead this college?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, I touched on it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Honor, which we touched on. You know, if I make a mistake, I own up to it. Yeah, I'm not worried. I have virtually no ego attached to anything I do. I'm always looking, I'm a performance psychologist, I'm always looking at how I can improve. And if I think I have the best way to do it and you come to me with another way that's better, I'll drop what I'm doing and say, yeah, let's do that. So adaptability is my second. You know, honor, adaptability, integrity. Integrity is its own reward. You know, I was the vice president of New Mexico Military Institute for 5 years, and one of the things being in that environment, I learned, you try to figure out what are some of these traditions and things they're doing. Like when the students walk, they have to square their corners, you know, when they walk, you know. And I said to Rear Admiral Ellison, he's one of my references, but I said to Rear Admiral Ellison, who just retired on the 1st as the president and superintendent of the National Defense Intelligence University and War College in D.C. and was my greatest mentor, but his doctorate degree is also in leadership development. But he said, Greg, the reason they do those things is for integrity, so that they know the basic level of leadership is followership, so that they know they can, to themselves, that they can be counted on when nobody's looking. And so I learned a lot from that environment, and integrity is a critical characteristic for me. Honesty. I'm 60 years old. I don't play games. I tell you what I know, and I hope you do the same with me. And between those things, maybe we can come together and figure out the best way forward. But And then the last thing is I treat people fairly. I treat people the way I like to be treated, and with respect and honesty. Diversity is such an important topic for me because I came from the wrong side of the tracks, and community college provided my way out. And so Spanish was my first language, and I grew up in the fields picking tomatoes with my Mexican-American mother. And but I was denied a lot of opportunity because I didn't have student services and the things that they have nowadays. And I'm the only one that found my way out of the fields. I don't think any of my friends back then who were bright, resourceful, loving, good kids are still alive. And my daughters right now, I was bragging to Marcos earlier, if I can brag as a proud father, my daughter is in her 4th week of med school today. And I always talked about to her about having a starting point. Starting points are critical, and through her education, she can choose her starting point. And because I got my education, it gave me a different starting point than she'll have to. She can start higher. And so I have a passion for community colleges because, there's a seat for everybody in the house. And I have a passion for helping people find that seat. And I have a passion for every voice should be heard. Everybody has their contribution to make. Mine wasn't heard for a long time. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. What is the most important thing you hope to accomplish during your tenure, and what skills and experience do you have to help you accomplish it?
These are thoughtful questions. I appreciate them. They're hard. Now, that one's kind of easy in a lot of ways. You're in a good place. I'd like to help you take that foundation you've had and go a little further with it in my tenure here. And what's critical to me is that I leave it in a better place than I found it, which would be hard because it's already in a pretty good place with the exception of some budget considerations, a few other things bouncing around compared to a lot of community colleges. Y'all are in better shape here than you may realize. There's a lot of special things happening here and a lot of innovative things. And so to be a part of that, advance that mission, and help lay the foundation for future success. I'm not a person that can come in, I work hard to the last day, and I'm not a person that can come in and bite my time off and leave it worse than I found it. I'd try to help y'all make it better for the family, which are the students and the staff that work here. So.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. What is your experience with college finances and budgeting processes?
I've had a great deal of experience with budgeting. I've approached several different, I've worked in several different budgeting approaches, from zero-base to base budgeting, baseline, to lots of different budgeting processes. And I've been responsible for parts and large budgets, and as the board-appointed acting superintendent president, I was responsible for the entire budget of a multiple campus district. And so I think I bring broad experience to that, considerable. I'm not a CBO. I'm not a CFO, But I can read the dashboard, I can drill down, I understand how things work, I can balance the books, I can usually help improve the lives of everybody on campus with things, but it takes time. And so I think I bring broad experience in that. It's not my key area, but I've had broad experience in it. So.
How will you promote SFCC's mission?
I was telling Marcos when he gave me a tour earlier that I was commending the institution for the brevity of the mission statement. Some of the ones I see, they're like 3 pages long, and they're a novel. They're a telenovela, for those of you who know what that is. And I've led the committees and written mission statements at 2 or 3 institutions, and never more than a sentence or two, a paragraph maximum. And I really think it's very innovative how you did that, where you have the mission, and then rather than going into vision, you go into goals. And I think it's well done, and you've mapped those very well to your equipment, your portfolio, and you're doing some good things there. And so I think continuing with that mission, I think there's several areas, and there are key areas that connect the institution to the community, and you've done a lot of good work in that, but I think it could go further. I keep talking about Marcos. Sorry, Marcos, I don't mean to embarrass you so much, but we had good dialogue, and the things that he's doing to get students on campus and marketing, and there are a lot of good systems and programs in place. I would try to take those further and build in more support if we can. One of the things I think Marco kept hearing when I was talking to everybody that was walking around, I'd stop and visit with them today because I wanted to get a feel for, there's such a thing as institutional culture, institutional climate, motivational climate. I was trying to assess those things, and I met a lot of really nice, good, hardworking passionate people here. A lot of you have graduated from here and are very passionate about the institution, and to be a part of that would be an honor. But but in listening to the things that are out there, I think there's a little more can be done. I think across the board, but in this area in particular, I remember I asked Marco, I go sit bothering him again, some questions about data, because I have, everywhere I've gone, tried to institute a culture of making data-driven decisions. Just because we have a good idea, which happens all too often in education, doesn't mean it will work or that it's really a good idea. It's a bright idea, but it may not be a good idea. And so I think I asked him what his market penetration was. You know, he's getting 6,500, 6,800 kids on campus for an event coming up, and I said, how many of those do you think you'll get here? What's your penetration? And he said, well, we're going to find that out because we're starting to get the data on it. So I think there's an area that could help pursue marketing and promotions and the directions here, you know, really identify the gaps and go after those. So I think that's an area I could probably help lay the foundation in a little more. So I'll leave it at that, because I didn't know how long this was. I got an email saying, you'll meet at 10 with so-and-so, you'll meet at 1 here, and I found out it's an hour and a half, so I don't want to take all my time up on I don't think so.
Okay, well, moving along. What does diversity mean to you?
Everything. You know, I touched on that. I'm not good at talking about myself, but I talked about my personal story earlier, and it means everything to me. I was on the wrong side of the tracks. I remember the hardships my mother had to endure, and I endured as a child too, and living in trailer parks, picking tomatoes, and if I used to carry the baskets, she'd load them. I'd carry them down and get her the credit for it and come back, and as a little guy, as I got bigger, I started picking, and then getting dropped off on West Capitol Boulevard in Sacramento, which is on the other side of the river from Sacramento, which is like the other side of the tracks, and if anybody knows that area, and walking 4 miles at night, walking 4 miles in the morning to the bus that would pit for the migrant workers to take us to the field, and 4 miles in the evening back. With my mother, we'd pass the Holiday Inn Hotel there, and they had a beautiful swimming pool, of course a big wrought iron fence, and these kids were diving off the board, and I kept seeing that every day. I said, Mom, that looks like so much fun. I was like 10 or something. I said, what do we have to do that? And she goes, oh, we can't, honey, that's for rich people. But she said, maybe someday your children will be able to. And so for a long time, it took me a while to figure out how to function in the system. And my education did that. And my education, I'm a product of a community college too. And the community college afforded me a way out of the fields. So I have a passion for this environment and would pursue that as far as I could. Diversity, like I said earlier, there's a seat in the house for everyone. And I get really concerned about some of the things that are happening right now with DACA and some other things. And this is a sanctuary school, which is something that was important to me. And I have, from a former life, I still keep my fingers in that, and I help students that are interested in that former life. And I work with them from a distance by Skype and video on Sunday evenings and give them their assignments and things to work on during the week. And one Korean family that I adopted when I was in Missouri, and they became an adopted family for me, and I've helped them over the years. Their eldest son is starting his second year now at San Diego State, and he wants to be a doctor, but he's a DACA student. And his parents own a dry cleaner, and they're legal immigrants. His 2 brothers were born here. He's in jeopardy. And so I have a passion for that particular circumstance right now because it's close to my heart. So anyway.
Great. Okay. So what is your familiarity with the current culture of New Mexico and Santa Fe? Which ties into what you were just speaking about.
The financial side or political things like we were just talking about?
I think either one, but since we just talked about the political, maybe whatever you're comfortable answering.
You know, it's not as easy to find information about funding for education as it used to be, because you used to have Tier 1, 2, 3, you know, you used to have a different funding formula than you have now, and they've changed that, and you start with a base, and then you, based on performance, the KPIs, key performance indicators, you get enhanced funding, and it's more performance oriented, so it's changed a little bit, and it's a more difficult environment, and there have been cutbacks across the board, and I know that you guys have been having to endure that and work through some things together and institute those cuts while still maintaining the quality, and that's not easy for anybody. So I think there are real needs at the institution. Remember, I said the family consists of 2 parts, the students and then y'all. all right, or all y'all, or whatever it is. And I think there's some needs that need to be addressed to help you folks, and I think the foundation needs to be laid for those things right now. And so I think the climate in Santa Fe is a difficult one for community college education right now. I spent 5 years banging around in the legislature during the legislative cycles here. You know, 1 year it's 1 month, the next year it's 3 months. And for the school I was at here in the state, I was the one that had that role. I was out on point advocating for the legislative agenda for our institution each year, banging elbows with the other presidents of the other schools. And I think my first year, if I boast, which it's not meant that way, we came back with more funding than we had the previous 8 years. And it's not because I was good at it. It's just because I went around and started talking to people about ideas, and nobody had heard our ideas. And so I think an advantage I have in this circumstance from the political side of it is I looked through the representative. Before I had my first interview for this position, I looked through the New Mexico State Legislature, and there's been a wholesale change from 8 or 10 years ago, but I still know about a fourth of the names in the representatives, and the Senate side still look familiar to me. Some of the ones I really like are gone, but Candy Spence Ezell is still there. Does anybody know Candy Spence Ezell? She's kind of a rock star from the Roswell area. If you see her, she's got that rock star quality to her. But so I know my way around, and I would know how to advocate for the school's institutional and legislative priorities, so I think that would help for that side of things. I do think there are things that need to be looked at for funding formulas for school. I've worked with the House Higher Education Committee, testified on the floor of the House many times, and helped build the state budgets back when Richardson was in, which was always a challenge because there were lots of things going on during that time. And so I think I'd be helpful to the school for this year to help continue the progress and maybe advance it a little bit. And I think there are real issues like we were talking about DACA and but a lot of other things too. And so I think I have utility in that way. So, and by the way, if you see me messing around here, I blew out my favorite cufflink earlier during the tour, and so I tried to adapt and survive so I wouldn't have to show y'all with a paper clip, but it's not working. This one still works. I'll go like this. So if you see me fiddling, it's because I lost my paper clip. But yes, adapt and survive.
The next is, how do you define student success? What is the value of the student voice?
Okay, we talked about the value of student voice earlier, I think. Did that answer that part for you guys okay? Because I'm a strong advocate for students. I see that you have written into your portfolio, the goal of being a student-centered campus. And I think that's really a really important concept. I believe in Senge and Tegan and a couple others' philosophies on student-centered, student-learning campuses. But we've moved. I remember 9 years ago, I'm still on the list. I haven't attended the last 3 or 4 years, but I used to be a representative for special school education, like New Mexico Military Institute, those sorts of things, military education, for summits at the Secretary of Education's office in D.C., and I would attend those 2 or 3 times a year. And I remember sitting there with the then brand new Secretary of Education, his first one, Arnie Duncan, under the Obama administration, and he said at that time that we're a strong believer in career and technical education, and we're going to have a big push towards that. And of course, he had Joe Biden in his ear because Joe Biden's wife is Jill Biden, and I don't know if you all know, but she's a professor and administrator now at Northern Virginia, Nova Community College. And so we had a lot of resources and funding come from that. But with that came a slight movement, not away from student learning, but in addition to that, from student learning and student-centered to from student-centered to student learning. I'm sorry. From student-centered to student learning. But the problems with that is you have very low completion rates. So we're pouring a lot of money into those things the first 3 or 4 years, and the outcome data wasn't supporting it. So they wanted to show outcomes. And so with that came all kinds of attachments for student success. And so student-centered is wonderful because it lets people like me in the door. But you have very low completion rates. And so there's been a large movement the last 4 years of the Obama administration carried over into the Trump administration, looking at, okay, are you being effective? You'll get funded for that. And they were talking about 8, 9 years ago trying to change the funding from full-time equivalent student budgeting, which you don't have here anymore, to, for a full-time student you get X amount of money. They've moved that here to performance, and they're trying to get more and more towards that, which in a lot of ways is frightening. And there's some good to it too. But at the same time, the student success component, ensuring that students are meeting their goals, that they're completing their goals, that they're not just getting in the door, but they're persisting, and they're getting off to better lives and careers. And so we can no longer be just junior colleges. They don't survive. You can't just be liberal arts and sciences. You have to have there are 3 main legs to the stool, but 5 total. You have liberal arts and sciences, which I'm a big believer in. When I went to community college, I did not know the difference in my first English class between your and the contraction you are. And I said, oh, that's what that means. And it was owing to having a bilingual background. And so that was, well, there's a lot I can learn here. And so that was the beginning of some insight for me. So a rising tide floats all boats. Junior colleges don't succeed. Comprehensive community colleges are, which you've done here. You've done a good job. Historically, northern New Mexico was the technical school in the state, and they've evolved away from that as they become 4 years. You guys had started that, and it's grown and mushroomed and doing a great deal. And those classes put students in other people's classes, and so it helps. So transfer, career and technical, basic education, 3 main legs of the stool for this environment, but also continuing education and lifelong learning, which is adult education, those sorts of things, and you have good foundational programs in those right now. I think 2,000 or 3,000 students in adult basic education, and I'm pleased to see what you're doing with ESL. 5.5 years ago when I took this job and moved back to California, the school's enrollment was down by 46%. So I was trying to figure out how to keep everybody working. You talk about rural problems. The way the funding formula works in California is for each full-time student. Pardon me for a second. I've been away, but I found the allergies are still there. It's blooming right now, and I could tell when I got off the plane last night. But the way we get our funding is each full-time equivalent student produces $4,675 of revenue for the school. And so, like at the school I have been at the last 5.5 years, you have to have 27 full-time students to fund a faculty salary. And so here you don't have that formula anymore, which in some ways is good. At the same time, you have to pay a close eye to what are the things that bring students in. Certainly you need the recruiting efforts like we were talking about earlier. You need to fill in the moat around the school, which is one of the challenges I had at my last institution and at the school when I was here in New Mexico. My boss at the time told me, everywhere else, fill in the moat around the school, Greg, and connect it to the community, because it was the academy, but it was not connected to anything. And so there's a lot of things that go into that to create a push of students to you and enhanced revenues. 3 key areas that do that, well 4, but 3 key programmatic areas that do that. Athletics brings students into a campus. Career and technical education is a key differentiator of this environment, but career and technical educators recruit students to their programs. And that the rising tide fills everybody's boats. Plus there's a lot of grant funding. For example, the school I've been at the last 5.5 years, I got a $6 million grant. We built the finest welding lab in the state. And we have a couple hundred students, 240 students in the welding program right now that didn't exist before, and those are high-paying blue-collar jobs. They make more than a lot of us do in this environment, And I'm going to get a certification when I permanently retire. But, so those sorts of partnerships enhance things, and they put people in the English and math classes, and it's not always easy to see that connection. And then and then basic skills. Those are the 3 main legs of the school, for remedial things of the stool for comprehensive community college. But there are 2 others: continuing education, lifelong learning, like I spoke about earlier. And so I think those things are critical for a vibrant, prospering community college, and you have the foundation well laid for that right now, and I'd try to advance that. So I think I'll leave it there. Did I ramble too much, or did I answer your question on that one? It was interesting. I like him. Anyway, go next.
Okay, next is, what is your experience with the unionization / collective bargaining process? Was the experience collaborative, or adversarial? Or something else?
Unfortunately, they too often tend to be adversarial, but I think that's one of my strengths. We're an organized state in California. I've worked in organized and right-to-work states, and both have some advantages, but I'm kind of odd as an administrator. I don't know. I've come to appreciate organized labor. I've come to enjoy working in that environment. If it's done well in a non-adversarial way, which I believe in interest-based bargaining, I don't know if you guys know that, and I know you're going through that challenge right now of trying to organize parts of the workforce here, and so I don't mind. I enjoy it because it defines roles, and if you define roles clearly and you accept those roles, it helps you accept them. It just occurred to me, in California they have something called 10+1, and it's in here. Well, I won't bore you, but it's in here. I'm a card-carrying 10+1 person because it's the 10 roles defined for faculty plus one mutually agreed upon in your bargaining agreement. And I carry that because sometimes people think there are things in there that aren't, or there are things in there that are and they're not aware of that would help them. And so I carry it and I'll pull it out in meetings at the risk of, I'm a little nervous and I'm not finding it, but it's in there. And, but because I believe it, I found it's easier. I think you have to be careful as you move forward to, when you deal with unions and you've aligned with somebody, and that's fine, I think you have to be careful because their training becomes to create an adversarial relationship for their own advancement. And you have to, I would just caution you, whether or not I end up here, to just try to not go down that path and create a bargaining agreement that helps advance things together so that it helps your cause and you can legitimately express your concerns. The administration can look at those and they can look at the inputs they're getting budget-wise or state or different things, and you can come together and have a good meeting of the minds. And at the end you can go out arm in arm because ultimately we're all in this together. So I would caution you to really look through the bargaining agreements in a way that don't create an adversarial relationship, but they do clearly define roles and then find people that respect those and work together. Does that make any sense? So I embrace it if it's done well. If it becomes adversarial, it can just ruin an institution. I've seen that happen. And if it's done well, it can make everything a lot better, frankly. So I've not worked in and I don't know of a shared governance environment. If you read the fine print, it usually says participatory governance. And so that means you have advisory groups, you have the academic senate, you can make their role, their concerns known, the union can bring their concerns known. A good administrator will look at those and try to collaboratively say, okay, I want to get here, but these are legitimate, so maybe we end up somewhere better together. And so I would really caution you to try to make sure the bargain agreement is written in a way that affords processes and roles and that allow you to march forward together, not separately. If you do that, you'll change this institution forever. Does that make any sense? And I won't be here to see it because you can't apply for the permanent from here. So anyway, but I would try to help you get to a good working foundation over the course of the next year.
Okay, so the next question is, what does shared governance mean to you, and what is your experience working in a shared governance system? It's sort of what you just talked about. Okay.
Participatory, because if you really read it, it always says participatory, but
right.
People say shared governance, and that's one of the things that the union leadership will constantly do because it confuses and blurs the line a little bit. Not the union leadership on campus, but outside, because they'll make you feel like, oh, we have a role we don't have. And then it rallies troops, and I'm not against unions. Like I say, I actually prefer organized labor, but participatory, and I think if you approach it that way, that everybody has a voice. It should be heard, like I said earlier, and those formalize a process. Those circumstances formalize a process in groups to express those voices. Does that make sense? Do I sound crazy, or am I making sense here? Okay, I'm rambling a little bit.
Okay, what is your familiarity with Academic Quality Improvement Process, AQIP? What is your experience with accreditation process?
Well, you're on the systems portfolio approach here through AQIP, and that's good. I prefer that. You have your 4-year portfolio. I currently serve on, and as a consultant, I serve on 2 accreditation teams in WASC, which is the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, and their subdivision, the ACC. The heck with the cufflink. So if it starts to look bizarre, you know what's going on. But I also serve on 2 accreditation teams, one in WASC and one in but they're both for community colleges. The ACCJC, which is where all the California community colleges come, which is a subdivision of WASC. And so I'm an accreditor. I serve on those evaluation teams. And I was just this morning received an email. There's something called another subdivision of AQUIP called IEPI, Institutional Effectiveness Performance Indicators. All the California schools have adopted that the last year and a half because they get at the student success stuff that we were talking about earlier. And they just asked me to lead, if I stay out there, to lead a IEPI evaluation team of 3 or 4 institutions out there. So I have broad-based experience in the accreditation area. I've worked in 4 different accreditation commissions, and a key part of that is, like in WASC and where I'm at, Section 4 is about governance. And so it's all about participatory governance and defining those roles and ensuring that those voices are being heard and that those structures and institutional organizations for participatory governance are indeed robust and functioning well. And so I understand that, and I enjoy working it because this is an environment where we have highly trained, skilled people that want to make a difference. And nobody's going to march through heck for you because you give an order, like I said, you mandate something by fiat. But you can really get a long ways together if everybody has ownership and they've participated in developing the vision. General Patton, remember George Patton? He always gets portrayed as the big cigar-smoking, tough. I don't know why the military always, the media always portrays whoever's the biggest, baddest cigar-smoking drill sergeant becomes a general. Well, they can't. They're enlisted, not officer. But and to get a star, a flag officer, admiral or general, you have to have a PhD. It's pretty hard to get there without it these days. And so you have a highly educated volunteer workforce, similar environment, because people are well-trained and highly invested in their own development and careers, and they're not going to go out and march through hell for you because you mandated something. And General Patton said years ago, you hire good people, you resource and empower them, and have them help in the development of the mission, and you get, excuse the verbiage, you get the hell out of their way, and you'll be amazed with their creativity. Now, does that sound like a drill sergeant or a servant leader? And if you really look at what he did, he was a servant leader. And so he was good at training and empowering people and then getting out of the way and seeing what they'd come up with. And that has to happen in this environment, and that's why participatory governance and everything in this environment is set for that. And that's what mandates honor, character, integrity, all those things, but in particular transparency that I talked about earlier. Too many people, the knowledge is power kind of a circular fault they fall into. Too many people will hold bits and pieces back for their own empowerment, but ultimately it fragments things, and you can't get anywhere together if people don't know what everybody else is doing. So I tend to meet with my senior staff. I meet with them every week. I'd like to hear from their subordinate groups weekly. I tend to meet twice monthly, and I don't know, I wouldn't mandate that here is done exactly the way I've done before. I'd have to see what's here. But I tend to meet with the president's groups, which is the president of the Faculty Association, the union, the president of the Faculty Senate, the president of the student union. I usually have a president's meeting for an hour every Friday is when I like to do it when I'm in the leadership role. And we just sit down and I say, tell me what's going on. What are you guys hearing from your area? Here's what I've got. And we had a lot of things off because we get on the same page. It's not that hard if you treat people with respect. So, anyway.
Thank you. All right, this will be the last question before we open up the floor to the questions from the audience. So, how can the college best support students in mental and emotional crises? It's not a trick question.
No. Somehow I thought you were going to ask something else with that. Was that it?
No, that's it.
Okay, I was waiting for the next part. Either that or I'm just getting slow. More caffeine. Meeting Lube. I asked Rose, the president's assistant, to have some brandy in a cup under there for me, but she didn't. It would have been a lot better if I'd had that support when I was going through, and a lot of my friends would have made it if they had that. People come to school. They don't come to school because of student services. They come to school. I'm still visiting with, I don't know where she is, the gal that's in charge of the testing center. She said she was coming. Are you here? Oh, yeah. Well, we were having that conversation, and I said, I don't see her. I saw her. Oh, there you are. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sorry I can't recall your name. I'm getting old. Emma, thank you. So we were talking, I said, people don't come here because of, it's the opposite side of the same coin from instruction, though. they don't come here because of student services. They come here because of instructional programs and the opportunity for a better life. But student services gets them in the door. And I like how you've put everything in the same kind of a one-stop shopping with, which I've done at a couple schools. I've brought that together, registration, financial aid, counseling. So you have those services right there for students and advising. And that's well done. But it's the student services and the staff side of the house that keep people in school and get at persistence and retention and a goal attainment. Certainly the instructors do a great job and advise and mentor them in their fields. So a large piece of that is having a counseling staff that moves beyond advising and actually is there to help students. And I don't know, it's something I hadn't had a chance to look at in my research. I learned as much as I could before I came. Do you actually have counselors on contract outside of the school? Imagine you probably do, huh? No? Okay, because I've done that at every school I've been at. We always have a couple licensed professional counselors that are on contract for students that are really dealing with difficult issues that we can refer them to. And that's been a key component of keeping a lot of students in school. And also a lot of students that were disturbed, had emotional problems, and it afforded the opportunity, yet another opportunity to grow and learn about themselves and work through issues that they might not have if they hadn't been in this environment. And so I think counseling and that side of thing is critical for this sort of thing, and I fully support it. I probably have enough academic credit I'm a licensed performance psychologist. I could probably be a counseling psychologist if I did my full 2,000 hours. I've done about half of them, my clinical supervised hours, but I do have a sensitivity to that area. So anyway, does that answer the question? Okay.
Yes, I was about to do that. By the way, before we start, I'd just like to also note that we have 3 governing board members who've joined us today. So thank you, Dr. Martha Romero, Dr. George Gamble, and Jack Sullivan for being here.
I have to just stop the process for a second and give Dr. Romero some credit because she used to be the president of the institution I've been at the last 5 years. But long before no, I shouldn't say it that way, I'm sorry. But well before I was there. So, sorry, I was supposed to help. Anyway.
This will be your easiest question and your hardest question today. Can you tell me what book you're reading now and what you've read lately?
My daughter gives me a hard time because I don't do any recreational reading because I don't have time. There's so many interesting things to learn. I try to learn things that help me grow as a professional. And so right now I'm reading a book called Difficult Conversations. Have you read that? I recommend it for everybody. I'm just the first chapter into it, but it's very interesting. A gal that has a doctorate degree in this area and is at a university is doing some research into how to diffuse difficult conversations and move forward together. I strongly recommend that. I don't know, I have a reading list for my senior staff that I try to encourage them to read, and sometimes I buy them the books and they say, oh no, something else to read. But I like things like foundational things for this environment. Has anybody read The World is Flat? Anybody else? You should absolutely read it. It talks about how things are changing. In India, for example, more people than China, right? In India. But Indira Gandhi, Gandhi's wife, when they separated from England and gained their independence, she had the wisdom to start 7 outstanding high-level technical institutions because she realized an educated workforce was critical for the country to move forward. Having a socialist economy, it was always difficult for them to do the economic reforms. But then they started funding students to come to this country, which we know we have a lot of Indian students in this country going to school. And when the dot-com bust came, this is the kind of stuff in that book, but when the dot-com bust came, Indian companies started buying up the fiber optic cables that we laid across, for 7 or 8 cents on the dollar. And it's made Bangalore, India, a backdoor to here. And so a lot of the things that we're teaching and educating, a lot of the Indian students come here and go home. The service sector jobs over there, 25% of the population in India has a bachelor's degree. That's more people than the entire population of the United States have a bachelor's degree. A fourth of that population has an advanced degree. And so things that can be done immediately, medical transcription, things that can be done immediately. You know, doctor can talk into a microphone. It's their 12 hours difference that goes to them. Next morning, it comes back. It's all done well by people that were educated here for about 6 or 7 cents on the dollar. And those jobs are difficult to bring back. In China, they have an unskilled, they have a skilled labor workforce, but not educated. And so when I was in Missouri before I went back to California, there was a fellow, a reverend, that inherited a tech business from one of his parishioners that passed away. And, you know, I was over there looking at it. He bought an old Montgomery Ward store in downtown Kansas City. Bought 3 stores that set up assembly lines. His engineers were designing things. He said there's 10,000 part suppliers in China. He goes over there monthly. They make things to his level. And they had a 250cc motorcycle, trail bike, that had double overhead cam valve, roller bearing, crankshaft, engine rated for 2,000 hours, which is a pretty high rated engine. And the guy took one off a bike and just threw it in the trash bin, bolted another one in. I said, isn't he going to repair that? And it's a sleeve cylinder. It was meant to be repaired. And he said, no. What do you think that engine cost me? It cost me $1,600 to have that engine made by Briggs & Stratton. What do you think it cost to have that engine made in China? And I said, I don't know. $800. I was thinking half as much. You know. He said, no, $54. And he said, so it's too expensive to even repair it. Just bolt another one in and go, melt it down and start over. And so I'd like to read books that tell me about those kinds of things, because that's by Thomas Friedman, who's a New York Times economist, and he makes a very strong case in there for the non-fungible skills, the things that can't be exported, either service sector or outsourcing and offshoring or outsourcing, which is why I chose to come back to community college. And that's why the previous administration got behind it real good, because the boots on the ground jobs that can't be replicated, like nursing, firefighter, EMT, welder, on and on and on and on, are what we specialize in. And we're the future here. You folks need to take stock in what you're doing, because you have a real chance not just to make the difference in the lives of your students, but also to lay the foundation for future success for our country. And I applaud where you're at and what you're doing. And so I read things like that. The world is flat, and then I would go to good and great, to good to great. Has anybody ever read that after that? Talks about companies that made the success jump from good to great, and ones that stayed there and ones that fell out. It's a study. It's not somebody's evangelizing about leadership. One of my favorites is Who Moved My Cheese? Have you guys read that? Simple little 45-minute read, but it's about change. Change is the law of God, and things happen, and you have to be able to move with it, adapt, like we were talking about earlier. And so I don't know, I read things like that. I'm also reading Thomas Kolditz's In Extremis Leadership in Extremely Hard Times. He's a professor at West Point. I'm reading that right now too. Did I answer the question? Because I get passionate about this stuff. I can bore you.
I have another question over here.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm
Hi.
Gilbert Senna. I run the automotive program.
What was your name?
Gilbert Senna.
Oh, Gilbert.
The new interim president is going to get thrown into the fire
Yep.
with the upcoming legislative session
Yep.
and funding. What is your experiences dealing with a citizens legislature?
I'm not sure if you were here earlier, Gilbert, when I talked about that, but I have 5 years representing another school as the vice president in the legislature here in New Mexico. And I still know about a fourth of the legislators. I have strong relationships. I know how to advocate for a school's legislative agenda and its needs, and I think it's an advantage of my candidacy.
I have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Emily Stern. I oversee the Center for Diversity and Integrated Learning on campus. My question is, can you please discuss your relationship to local Indigenous communities and how you might better inspire and support their success at SFCC?
Well, with the local Indigenous communities, pueblos in this area, I've not, in this immediate area, not had a lot of experience. I did work with the BIA Bureau of Indian Affairs for tribal police training and grant funding for that years ago when I was at New Mexico Military Institute. I set up programming. Dr. Romero will know of the Karuk Indian Nation, which is near where I am right now in California, and Buster, the chief there, and I have done a lot of work. They're a short 3.5-hour drive from us, which is about like everything is there, and it's like here in New Mexico. It's a long ways geographically challenged. You can go 3.5 hours either direction east or west, and you're still not at the edges of our district. But it's a long way for those students to come to our school, and it's like, remember, what was the John Travolta dancing movie years ago? And crossing the pardon the analogy, crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, or for me, crossing the Sacramento River Bridge, like I talked about earlier. But remember that, how it was hard for him to cross the bridge and get out of his old things? Well, it's the same thing for the Karuk Indian Nation. They're very remote. They're in a place called Happy Camp, California. You guys ever heard of that? I remember I jokingly said to the board when I visited with them before, have you ever heard of Happy Camp? And of course she had, and one other person had. But I said they're neither happy nor are they camping there. It has the highest violent crime rate in the state. But to help those students try to cross that bridge to come to Little College of the Siskiyous, that was like crossing the Brooklyn Bridge for them, and they could not do it. So we built a distance education center. I got the funding and built a distance education center on their high school campus, and started that, reworked, actually went back from my old roots and reworked some tribal police training with them and through our police academy and different things. So I've had experience with tribal leadership, and I do have some native blood in me, so I have an appreciation for those circumstances. So, but I wouldn't want to pretend that I know all the ins and outs of the tribes around here. So.
I have another
Hi,
question over
good
here.
afternoon. My name is Gregory Scargill. I run the Veterans Resource Center here. Just want to know if you have any military background and how you feel about student veterans in higher education and the idea of a Veterans Resource Center.
So you work in the Veterans Resource Center now, Greg?
Yes, sir.
Do you have a military background?
I do. I was a Navy corpsman with the United States Marines.
Oh, Swabby. Thank you for your service. Well, I was in uniform as a CES 06 when I was at New Mexico Military Institute, which in 06 is a full colonel, for those of you who don't know that environment. So I have a rich appreciation for that environment. My mentor, I don't know if you were here earlier, is Rear Admiral David Ellison, who's an old surface warfare guy and the most egalitarian, fair, and incredible leader I've ever met. And I learned a great deal from him, but I used to know the Adjutant General here in the state, but I know that, 3-year TDYs, and he's gone now, and a couple of successors, but it's evolved, but I know my way around that world. And I applaud you for the efforts that you're doing here. Veterans Affairs has been a big initiative coming from the Department of Education in D.C. the last 3 or 4 years. And this state, most people, you guys probably know it, but most people around the country don't. The center third corridor of the state's a military corridor, right? And there are actually more military assets in the state of New Mexico than the entire Union. And so we have a lot of people around here and a large population to serve, and I would welcome the conversation to advance that. So, does that answer your question, Greg? Good name, by the way.
I have a question over here.
Yep.
So, Jill Carlson, I'm co-chair of Staff Senate. My question is, how will your personal, political, or religious beliefs influence your decision-making when working with SFCC's diverse groups, specifically with regard to our LGBTQ population?
I think I've addressed that earlier in some of my other questions, but I think the key thing there is something I said about there's a seat for everybody in the House, and I have a passion for helping them find that, but also everybody has a voice and it needs to be heard, whether or not you realize what their personal circumstances are. And so I have a passion for that. I have family members that were denied opportunity because of it, and so it's a personal axe I grind. Does that answer your question? Yep, thank you.
I have another question over here. When it comes to building community, what ideas do you have, and how can you and the student government collaborate on that?
Okay. We talked about student government and the trustee role and those sorts of things earlier, and I would stick with what I said there. I would add that having student input and support and participation in things is important. The larger question of community, the things that I've talked about earlier, I'll get back to the notion of engagement. I look forward to engaging with all of you, finding out what your passions are. It takes a little while, but I like to spend time visiting with every faculty member, every leader of an area in their areas, and hearing what their passions are, what their needs are, and how I can help, and then how we can build those things together. You can't do everything, but you can always do something. And if we can free people to exercise the talent they have, the sky's the limit. So does that answer your question? Okay.
I have another question over here.
Gregory, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
Good. My name's Henry Mignardo. I'm the Executive Director of Plant Operations Management. Good friend of Colonel West and MMI. You bet. You know, there's a lot of functions that go on in educational institution that are behind the scenes. They are extremely critical to the educational process and specifically to the cost of education. Could you give me a little insight on what your familiarity is with capital outlay, building renewal and replacement, and the construction process in general?
That's a very good question. You know, you can only find out so much on the web and you know, at the school's website and looking around the legislature and trying to find out where things are at. I was trying to look at what deferred maintenance is here. I was trying to look at the needs. You've done a lot of new construction, and I was fascinated with trying to find out where where the institution's at with older existing buildings, which have all been maintained very well. Do you know if they have, one of the things I couldn't find, do you know, and maybe the board can help me answer that, I don't know, but do you know if they have deferred maintenance budgets? Do they have endowed funds for maintenance, you know?
There's not endowed funds, but we do have deferred maintenance. And typically we have capital outlay.
Yeah.
The general obligation bond that we submit to the state annually, and that's the funds that we submit.
Yeah, pretty standard. You know, at New Mexico Military Institute, I was involved with building 13 facilities. 8 of them were completely mine. The ones that I was completely in charge of, we put endowed maintenance funds together for them so they would keep looking like they did. The Daniels Leadership Center, we went to the Daniels Fund, you know, Bill and Jack Daniel brothers, founder of cable TV up in Colorado. We went to the fund up there and asked for the Admiral and I asked for $8.8 million. We got 14.4. The rest was for an endowed maintenance fund. So that building will always look like it did the day it was new, and it will continue to grow and evolve. And try to do that everywhere. You can't always do it. And so you work through the processes you described. And yeah, I've had experience there, but I don't have good technical knowledge about here because I couldn't find the information. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Rebecca Estrada, and I oversee the Higher Education Center, which is a Santa Fe Community College endeavor, but of course houses our 4-year partners, as well as overseeing the dual credit program, which is the program where our students earn high school and college credit simultaneously. We have 19 partner schools. It's about 3 to 4% any given semester of the students that we have enrolled. My question would be, what do you see as the president's role both in helping to foster all those kinds of partnerships? We're talking about leaderships with superintendents, principals, presidents, provosts, as well as the way that we can communicate both to the community and to the legislature how those partnerships are beneficial and how it's leveraging resources, it's being a responsible steward in the community and for the region.
Wow, there's a lot in that one. That was a good one.
Just a little.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, what was it you said at the beginning there? But I rather suspect she can repeat it. Yeah, well, I looked through the documentation on the web, and I looked through some other things. I'm fascinated by it because I've seen those at several schools. One school I was at, we had started that when I left, and it fits perfectly with the mission of a community college, what you're doing out there. The long answer to your question is you have to create pathways. I got a $6 million grant for career pathways at the school I've been at the last 5 years, and but that was to put pieces of manufacturing processes at all the junior high schools, the high schools, to create a pathway and a push of students up to complete it at our institution. So they kept progressing in their training through. So what I did to initiate that, to lay the foundation to get that was I went around to all 14 area high schools 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. Took a group of senior staff with me, and we created MOUs with all the high schools in our district for dual credit, dual enrollment, which in California was a little bit of a bigger challenge because if they released them from high school, the high school lost the funding. And so I worked with the Chancellor's office, some other people, because there's 113 schools, you have to work collaboratively. It's not like here where you can go advocate for things by yourself or in partnership with a few other schools. And we got the legislation changed so that the students could collect, the high schools, they call it ADA Monday, that's their funding out there, so the high schools could collect their ADA money while at the same time being enrolled in our classes, we can collect our FTES formula that I talked about earlier, plus it would count above their AP courses. So there's a real advantage to the students, and we created pathways, and they come through us. And then the other side of that is something I was doing when I was here in New Mexico, was creating 2+2s and 2+3s, you know, for bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in those pathways. So all of those things fit together and they integrate, and if you do them well, they keep your local students going through your programs and succeeding and staying in the community. And so I've had experience in this, but I think mine's an integrated, systemic approach to those things. And this is a piece, what you're doing is a large piece of that, because it takes them to the next level. I think too often at this level, they finish here and they're dumped out. And if they have that first leg of our stool or mission transfer in mind, they can't get that done. And so this is a valuable piece. And so I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay, I'll leave it there.
I'm Luke Spangenberg from the Innovation Center, and I'm a staunch advocate of sustainability, working with Henry and a lot of the folks on campus. Santa Fe Community College has been recognized over the last decade for their efforts in sustainability, not only in the classroom, in our community, in our facilities. How do you see, under your leadership, moving that forward or keeping the fire burning bright?
You know, a fellow that was the academic dean at New Mexico Military Institute when I was there moved up to become the president of Bismarck State, and then the chancellor of the system for the last 4 years. He's still the president of Bismarck State. He just retired out of the chancellor's position. Larry Scogan, Dr. and Lieutenant Colonel Larry Scogan, and one of my dearest friends. We speak every couple weeks. And my old bicycle riding buddy. There's nothing better than 9 o'clock at night on a warm summer evening when it's dark, coming down over 6 Mile Hill into Roswell, New Mexico, with all your lights on looking like a UFO, and it just feels great. Anyway, Larry and I used to ride 22, 24 miles a day on our bikes, and I miss that. But Larry and I, when he was applying, I remember when he was applying for the job at Bismarck State 7 years ago, 8 years ago, he said, what, I need to have a theme when I go in there. And I said, well, it's a comprehensive community college. It's going to be complex. And it's interesting that you asked this, because you folks are already there. And we were talking about it, and I went home and thought about it. And I came back the next day when we went for a ride, and I said, well, I don't know. I was maybe an idea, because I looked at what they had on their website, and it's very well established, but it's not where things are moving now with career and technical education and some other things. And I said, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't know. Just the word came to me, innovation. I don't know how you could put that together. There's a lot there, but that became his theme, and that's why I ended up being the chancellor. And you folks have a great deal of innovation going here. Frankly, I'm very impressed. I've seen bits and pieces of what you're doing at other schools I've been at, but not as much of it in one place as I've seen here. And like I said earlier, you need to take stock in what you're doing, where you're at, and what you have the potential to do together here in the future. And that's why you can't get into adversarial relationships, because you won't get there. But if you can all stay together, you have the chance of accomplishing something great. So my answer to you is innovation, and continue what you're doing. We spent, a half hour walking around looking at things today, and I could have spent the whole day out there. So there's so many, it's fun. There's so many exciting things happening out there that are laying the foundation to make a difference in people's lives, but it's also making a difference in our community, our state, and our country. You guys are doing that here. Not all community colleges are in that, at that threshold right now. So please take stock in what you're doing. So does that answer you, Mark? Okay.
We have another question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a whole list from the Staff Senate.
Oh, that's fine.
So one of the things that's important to the Staff Senate is establishing a staff salary matrix. Currently, there is not a step matrix for staff salary.
I couldn't find it, yeah.
There is not one. In regard to that, one of the best opportunities we have is the potential for a mill levy election and or a capital bond. They've talked about doing a swap, and I'd be interested in your experiences with those kinds of elections.
Yeah. The board asked me that question too, and I think it's a good question. By the way, ask all your questions. There's no dumb ones, and it doesn't take too long. I'll stay as long as you want, because no, you guys, all of you, faculty and staff, you're the ones that execute the mission here. I was talking to Mark earlier. I said, yeah, but you guys are the ones that get. He said, well, you guys bring this money, and I said, yeah, but you guys are the ones that get to have fun and go do it, but we've got to create the circumstance that fosters that fun, and part of it are the kinds of things you're looking at. Now, I've not had experience going out and initiating a mill levy, but I've been involved as a member of a committee that did that at one institution I was at, and I've not led a bond initiative directly myself, but I've been a key member of the senior administrative cabinet when we did that process at several institutions. And every time we've been successful, so I've been there and I've seen and I've learned from it. But I wouldn't want to misrepresent myself as, oh yeah, I'm the guru of that. I'm not. But we could make it work. Thank you. Sure. Yes, sir. Oh, I don't know who she had. Oh, okay.
It's my understanding that in California, they've instituted 2 new degrees, the AST and the AAT, standing for Associates in Arts Transfer and Associates in Science Transfer. The state of New Mexico has difficulties with our research institute, our research university, accepting full transfer value for the associate's degree. Could you speak a little about the AAT and AST and where we are in New Mexico today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm just sitting for a minute, when I was coming out of the San Francisco airport 2 years ago, and some guy was on his cell phone, and he was doing 55, and I was doing 5, and hit me and damaged my bottom lumbar, and I'm fine. I'm 95%. It's just the worst thing is standing up, so that's why you see me leaning on the podium, and so if I'm moving around and stuff, I'm okay. But so if you see me sit, it's not because of disrespect for your question. It's just I want to get off it for a few minutes. It's rather like New Mexico State Assembly Bill 1978, where you tried to ensure transfer curriculum model guidelines. We had Senate Bill 2011, Senate Bill 1440, the Padilla bill out in California, which tried to align. In California, there's several systems of higher education. You have the UC system, which is the premier research institution for UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC, those, and so their funding formula has always been heavy weighted towards research. Then you have the CSU system, the California State University system, which would be kind of like New Mexico State, but without the research component, but it's the whole entire system with 13 schools, and it's a good system. To help fill in the funding formula for the UC system, so they wouldn't have to spend a lot of money providing lower division education, the California Community College system came into existence to provide that education at less expense. So to this day, the California Community College system with 113 students is the largest state-supported institution in the world. And it educates a lot more students more efficiently. The cost-effectiveness ratio is much better for it than it is the UC schools. But so that was their mission. So if you went to a UC school, they couldn't deny you admission if you graduated with a lower division preparation and a major. So that system's always worked reasonably well. There have been some issues over the years as things started to evolve away from that. So the Padilla Bill was designed to bring that back together. But the CSU system was never aligned, the California State University system, nor was the California Polytechnical system, which there are 7 schools in that. And so the Padilla Bill was an attempt to do that and to align that. And so they came up with the ADT Associate Degree of Transfer and 2 different ones like you had talked about. To help get at that would have the TMC, they call it a transfer model curriculum that would align those things for each major. I think we have aligned at the school I was at, aligned 14 different majors with those, and it's not been easy. The CSU's pushed back. There were all kinds of things. Politics played lots of different things, and we're just trying to benefit the students. We're trying to ensure that when they get 2 years from us, they don't have to go back there and take 2 more years at the next level. And so I've been part of that process, and so the answer is it's a lot longer than I can give here, but the answer is there's a lot to it and a lot of good that can come for the students, and it really enhances the community college mission, which is part of what the CSU schools were afraid of, is that it would take students from them. And in reality, the data is showing that it adds students to them at the upper division level. So I see that with 1978, your assembly NMSA bill, it was an attempt in that direction, and I think there's probably more work that needs to be done, rather like it's different than California, but rather like or in the direction of the same goals. Does that make sense? Yes. Were you going to add something? No. Oh, it looked like you had a question. So I think you have more work to do in the state to ensure that, and that permanently institutionalizes the mission of the community colleges in the state, and I think there's work to be done there. I would welcome being part of that. I fear that as an interim position, I might not be around long enough to move it very far, you know? I think you're 3 to 5 years away from being where you need to be with that. At the state level, not here, not at the institutional level.
Just to let you know, we have time for one more question.
It's just getting fun.
Sorry. Okay.
Very patient.
So who?
So good afternoon, Dr. Maxwell. My name's
South. That was my dad, Maxwell.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Muy bien, gracias. I'm the director of the Office of Student Development, and so I oversee clubs, organizations, student government, student ambassadors. I have my students here as well. I always tend to have my students around learning from their leaders.
Yeah.
So mine is kind of a three-part question. First is green. Do you like green, red, or Christmas?
Oh.
Second is, how do you see young leaders today? How critical do you believe it is for us to continue to create the young leaders at Santa Fe Community College? And how critical is it to have extracurricular activities to engage our students in retention?
I like all the primaries. And green's my favorite color. And I like a salad bowl. Everything contributes. So, the second part of the question, how did you phrase that again?
So when we're looking at our young leaders at Santa Fe Community College, how critical is that to continue to develop those types of leaders that you see we need in our country today?
Yeah. No, that's the direction I thought it was. Just wanted to ensure I was going to answer the right question, or the right answer for that question. Remember, my research interest and passion in publications is in leadership development. And I view students in student government as being there for that reason, to learn and grow and how to be contributing members of our society and make a difference. One example of one that I mentored many years ago was Mahmoud Sikh, who was the president of the student union at the University of Idaho. I was there for 10 years. It's a research one-land grant institution. And he's now the president of the Idaho Bar Association. But that came through, we've talked about it, it came through his leadership experience being the student president and learning how to function and lead. And leadership is more than managing and execution, which happens a lot in this environment and in other bureaucratic environments where people, maybe they go from education to education to get a degree, which I did. And then maybe they make some noise, which I did, and I became a chair, probably to shut me up. But and then after a while, you know, you become a dean and maybe a vice president, maybe a president, or, you know. But in that, you learn how to do accreditation, you learn how to spend budgets. But that's not that's management and leadership. That's management and execution. That's not leadership. And I think it's vital, and that's the reason I became interested in leadership, is that we need to prepare and train our leadership for the future. And part of that is those students participating in those things. That's why I meet with those groups regularly, is I try to actually have goals for them to learn about in leadership, and different approaches and different styles, and adopting different leadership styles for different circumstances, and how to structure your arguments to be effective and build support and lead. And okay, you tried that, but that didn't work. I try to use student government as a business leadership incubation lab, where they get to, in a business-like fashion, learn how to hone their leadership skills and how to function. So I think it's critical. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Well, that and the last one.
And what was that again?
So,
too much caffeine.
How do you see extracurricular activities or events, workshops, to engage students and work with retention?
I think there's one other thing I would add to that. I think it's vital. I think it's critical. The other thing is internship opportunities. And I always told my daughter, which I boasted about earlier, but being in med school, it's not been an easy life, and she's such a good kid. And I used to tell her, and she's recently married a young man, when they were dating, I used to tell both of them, I say, you know, get a degree that will get you a career, that gives you a shingle to hang outside your door and say, I'm a professional in this, I get paid for it. But moreover, get multiple stackable certifications, which we do in this environment. They don't do it at the 4-year level. They give you quantifiable skills, so you can say on my resume, yeah, I did this, and I did this, and I did this, so I have some, you know, not just a degree in alcohol. I say that to them, pardon the expression here, but they didn't just go to parties when they went to college. You know, my daughter is a licensed professional in 7 different fields right now, has her certifications, and that helped her get into med school. And she could go stop at any of those things and have a career. And I told her husband, who's a fine young man, my son-in-law, the same things, because he was wanting to stop, and there's nothing wrong with what he wanted to do, but I told him the same thing, so we kept setting goals each semester. Well, why don't you get this certification in what your area of interest is? Why don't you do that? So he's a mechanical engineer now, and he's working in the design headquarters for Bobcat, and they're off the payroll. But, you know, he's supporting the family while she's going to med school. So does that answer your question? Oh, I also, for his last 3 years of college, I told him, let's identify valuable internships. So he worked at Schweitzer Engineering. They're an IT company. Had a paid internship. His last full-time during the summer, 40 hours, and up to 40 hours a week if he could during the school year, which he couldn't, at $25 an hour. And it helped take a big load off for them during, you know, when they were completing their undergraduate degrees. So my daughter has done the same thing at the hospitals. And so I'm using my personal experience. I don't want to bore you with me and my family, but it's what I believe. So I think those things are all critical that you said. You guys are the ones who are going to have to take care of us. We've got to make sure we do it right.
All right, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to hear the closing remarks.
Hi, Dr. South. My name is Deborah Bolt. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Community College Foundation. And thank you for sharing your personal stories. Really wonderful to hear.
I hope they weren't too boring.
Not at all, not at all. And I'm also
Don't talk about
a community
me.
college graduate. Proud to say, Miami-Dade Community College.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah.
My ex-wife took classes there.
Pardon?
My ex-wife took classes there.
There you go. So yes, and this is an extraordinary school. I'm just wondering how you've used your leadership skills in fundraising for some of the innovative projects that you've told us about today.
I think I've raised like $32 million in fundraising projects. I think I've raised a little over $32 million in fundraising and development projects, mostly through writing, through 2 things: legislative appropriations, like we talked about earlier, but also community block development grants that I've written, and that benefited, added programs and training that benefited the community. One place I was at, Steve Cannon owns he's the CEO and owner of a large power plant manufacturing company near a school where I used to live, and he had relocated from California there, near a school where I used to work. And I went to him and I said, well, what are your training needs? He said, I don't have anybody to operate power plants. I said, well, we don't have a power plant to operate, but if you help us build one, we'll train your power plant. And so essentially, it was more than that. So in that town right now, they have a 3 gas turbine, methane gas turbine fired power plant that the school owns. And it's burning biomass, but also I got the idea. I've done some research in that why, you know, there's a lot of methane gas coming out of landfills, and why don't we mine the methane gas out of the landfills? And the engineers at that point, 7, 8 years ago, said that where's time go, that there was enough methane gas if they added no more no more trash to the landfill, essentially. To fund that, to fuel that town's energy needs for until 2137. And so we did that. I wrote 2 community block development grants to that, 1.6, 1.8 million, to help fund our end of it. It's generating a little bit more than $1 million in revenue in power generation. About half of that's coming back to the school after expenses now, and it powers the entire school. And so I remember another school I was in Missouri. I was sitting in Jay Nixon, the governor's office conference room. I was against the wall, and his cabinet was at the table in the center, a bunch of us around the wall, and I was new to the state. And they said, yeah, the Pin Oak Lodge down in Lake of the Ozarks, I don't know if you've been there, but it's this massive lake. And on a peninsula of land, there was an old CCC Conservation Corps lodge that was much beloved, that had been built, and it's where the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts have been housed since it was built, and everybody loved it because they'd all been Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts there, and it was struck by lightning and burned to the ground. And he said, I don't know how we're going to rebuild that. And I said, I have an idea. And he said, who are you? Well, I'm the new guy over here at this school, but we have a construction management program, we have a computer-aided design program, and you have engineers. And I said maybe we could put a program together where our programs, in conjunction with the designs of your engineers, could rebuild the lodge, and we could do an accelerated program, use the lodge as a laboratory. We had an extension campus nearby. So that created an accelerated program where the students could get their associate's degree in 1 year and come out with all kinds of multiple stackable certifications. $850,000 grant from the state for equipment, and community block development grants, 2 of those, 1.5, 1.7 million for those. Just examples, I've done a bunch of that over the years. And so I've had a lot of experience in it, but and the president has to be very involved in those things, but that's why we have you guys too. It's a partnership.
Thank you. Those are great examples. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm welcome to stay and take more questions unless...
Well, actually, I think we're going to thank you for all of your answers to today's questions. Would you like to make some closing remarks?
Oh, I have to do that, huh?
You don't have to.
They didn't tell me what to do. Now I got to do it. Okay, let's see. I don't know. I think okay, a couple questions for you folks. From my dialogue today and the sorts of things I've said, do you have kind of a picture of who I am and where I come from, my approach to things? Do you have any thoughts or concerns about any of that or questions? What? Just quickly, these are going to be short questions if you have one, because we're not supposed to do questions. What? Yeah.
I appreciate your willingness and leadership, just some of the adversarial roles between the faculty on the unionization right now. So I appreciate your honesty and your perspective on it. I think it's enlightening.
Well, thank you for that. That means a lot to me, actually. Those things need not be adversarial if people approach it from the perspective that we're going to lay the foundation to have a better, higher functioning institution. If it's real adversarial, like I say, things can blow up. And then you're paying money to the union, everybody's unhappy, there's lots of grievances to being filed, and things go downhill. But I've seen it work very well with good leadership, so I welcome that. I talked a little bit about me a little bit earlier, just that I'm kind of halfway thinking about retiring the state. I'm 60, I could still work for a few more years. Like I say, my friend called me and told me that I'm failing at my retirement by applying for this job, but it's crossed my mind I can do this a few times, or if I find a place I like, I could stay there, which won't be here because this is terminal. But I'm already vested in the retirement system. This is home. My phone number is still a 575 number. I never got rid of it. And my leash there. And I have family between here and Colorado. And so there's a lot of personal reasons for me to want to be here, because I'm going to end up here in one way or another permanently. So that's personal stuff with me. Plus I like the weather, I like the climate, I like the people. It's nice to be in an environment. I turned the radio on in the car at midnight. My flight, I got there at 12:39. It was supposed to be like at 9 o'clock, and it was set to a Spanish station. And it's nice to hear Spanish, and just so I feel at home. And I think there's a lot of things with my legislative background here, with my leadership background, where I could help the school through this time for the next year. And I think there's a lot I can learn here from all the innovation. And so there's a lot of personal reasons for me wanting to be here and try to do this for a year and work with you all and learn from you. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'm not a good speech maker. So, okay. Thank you.